Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Photoshop tutorial. For today's episode, we are going to create this butterfly girl composition. And this video in particular, it's not necessarily going to be a step-by-step at the current speed tutorial, but it is going to be a bit more of a breakdown, and you are going to see all the steps that it does take to go into making this process. Unfortunately, some of these compositions are just pretty not intense, but just take a lot of time to complete, and to actually make a video step by step, it'll just take a long time, and I'm sure I'll bore you to death as I do that. So I wanted to break this down just a little bit faster to help you still understand the process in making this. So without further ado, I think it's time let's jump into this tutorial and let's get started. Alright, so here we are with our canvas, 5000 by 4000 pixels. We're turning on our background and scaling this up so it fits our entire canvas. So somewhere right about here, just find a nice spot for it. And then once we kind of got this in place, we're going to load in our girl, and I've already extracted her from the background just for sake of time. And let's just go ahead and nudge this over just a little bit more for our background here. Okay, this looks good. Alright, we're going to go into the camera raw filter with our background just so we can do some little adjusting before we move on. So we're going to go to the basics tab at the top here, and let's just increase the contrast a bit as well as some of our highlights. And I think this will be pretty good for right now. Let's jump into the detail. We're going to increase the sharpening, and then if you hold Alt or Option, we'll smooth this slider so you can kind of see what's getting that sharpening effect. Excellent. We're next going to go into this color mixer, do a little bit of adjusting in here. The sky is a little bit too saturated for my liking, so we're just going to bring that down a bit. But I do want to increase the lightness of those blues, so that's what we're doing here. And then we'll make just some final adjustments here with some of the colors. Sometimes just play around with this to see if I like some of these transitions. But essentially, this is pretty much the look that we're going to go with here. Alright, so let's hit OK. And now we have this, and we can turn our main character back on, our main subject. And the first thing I'm going to do is drop in this 3D asset, which is going to be a skirt. I'm just going to cover this bottom portion up here. It'll look kind of silly if she's in a bathing suit in the field. So we're going to add this on here and just kind of adjust this accordingly just to make sure that it kind of fits with her body. And we can control or command click on some of these anchors to move them out and distort this to get the right perspective. Alright, so that looks really nice to start out with. We'll do a little bit more adjusting with this as well. So let's go ahead and lower the opacity on the skirt. Alright, so now that we can see through a bit, let's just do a little bit more editing. We're going to go right into the warp feature here to try to manipulate this so it looks like it fits better to her body. We can even lower this down just a little bit as well so it looks a bit more natural. And then on top of that, we can add the puppet warp feature, again just taking it a step further to just again make it a bit more customized and fitting correctly with her body. But I think this is looking really good. So once we have this in place, next thing that we're going to have to do is delete her body. So that's what we're doing now. We're using this pen tool here just to create a selection of the lower body. We're going to right click, make a selection, and then add a layer mask and get rid of that. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have that clear, we're going to add in these cages, and I got a couple of different angles of these cages, and I'm paying attention to the big ring right now. So if you look at that top ring, I'm trying to align it with her rib cage and just make it look pretty accurate. And then again, we're gonna have to warp this so that it just is customized to the shape of her figure. So something right about here I think will look pretty good. And then the next thing that we have to do is add a layer mask on there, and we're gonna delete the bottom portion in the area that is going to be on top of that shirt. So we're going to erase all of this because we don't need it. And the same thing with the bottom part of this ring. We don't need that as well. So let's go ahead and take care of that and clean this up. Because the next thing that we're going to do is just add in another cage for that bottom portion. So we're just cleaning this up, getting rid of it so we can add in that second layer. And you can see here I added a solid color below just to help me out visually. And let's go ahead and load in the next cage. Alright, perfect. So same thing, we just want to size this proportionately here. And again, we're focusing on the bottom ring this time, just the bottom ring, using the warp feature to make this fit with her body. And for this, we're only actually going to keep that bottom ring itself. We're going to get rid of everything else because the next step is quite tedious. I don't want the bars to look warped and bent, and I want them to look straight. So what I'm actually going to do here in a second is we're going to load in just kind of a copy of the cage here, and then essentially we're going to take each little bar one piece at a time, cutting that out, and then just starting to align them with the bars that are there right now, just so everything looks straight and accurate. So that's what we're doing now. Here is our cage, and let's just go ahead and zoom in just a bit, and I'm going to use the pen tool. We're going to start with the left side here at the middle, and we're just going to create a selection of just these two little bars first. Let's go ahead and do that, and once we have that, right click, make a selection, then Command J to create a copy of that, and then we're just going to place this over here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the process. It's very tedious, but I like the look of it. I'll do this one more time. We'll just create a copy of this, make a selection, okay, Command J, line it up. That's it. Easy as that. You understand the process. And just so I don't bore you all to death, we're just going to skim right over this to where I've already completed that. So let's see how that looks in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, I think this looks pretty good, and let's go ahead and move on. So the next thing we need to adjust is just to make the clothes look a bit three-dimensional and not so flat. So let's turn on our background layer once more. And then what we're going to do here is just behind our main subject, we're going to use the pen tool. And we just want to create a little bit of a shape that looks like this would fit with the back of our shirt. And we're going to fill that in with a solid color here. And let's just make sure that this is behind our subject. Let's do that. Perfect. And then we're going to do the same thing with the pants as well, or the skirt. Fill that in with a nice dark brown color. And let's adjust this so that's not going out of bounds. Perfect. Okay, so now that we got those in place, I want to do a little bit of correction with the shirt here. So we're adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer, put it into colorize, practically desaturating it all the way and increasing the lightness because I want it to be a white shirt and not that bright pink color. And we're going to get rid of that right now in that layer mask, just painting white. And we can touch up these edges as well, make sure it's nice and clean. Kind of like the combination of the brown and white, so that's what we're going with. And then a nice light grayish tone for the inside of the shirt. You don't want it to be completely black. The light is still going to shine through, so that's why I'm kind of going with like this grayish tone. And then to really sell this hollow effect, we're going to add another solid color adjustment layer on top of this, a dark gray tone this time. And we just want to create a bit of depth at the very top by her chest area. So using a soft round brush, let's just go ahead and paint some of that color in at the top. But we're not going to do too much because this is an outdoor setting and it is pretty bright. Let's get rid of that bottom portion. But I think we'll stick with this so we can go ahead and continue on. I want to increase a little bit of contrast with our main subject here. So let's go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer. And we're just going to bring in the shadows as well as the highlights to create that contrast. And I'm actually going to add a couple of these layers because I want to fix the hair as well. But this is going to be like an overall lighting adjustment here. And we're going to add another one here. This one's primarily going to be for the hair. So don't pay too much attention to the skin. We're going to invert this mask and then just kind of paint back in the hair area. So just painting white just right around here. We're going to touch up the hair as well, but this is at least going to give us a nice foundation to work off of. And then lastly, we can just top this off with the color balance adjustment layer. Just kind of work with some of these tones a little bit and see if we can just maybe match just a little bit better with her background. Okay, I'm happy with that. So the next thing we need to do is add some contrast with this cage. It's very, very dark and blends in with the background. So this hue and saturation adjustment layer is going to give us the lighting that we're looking for. But then we also have to add the shadows as well by the shirt and the pants. So that's what we're doing here with the exposure adjustment layer. And that should take care of that. And next I want to add a bit of Gaussian blur to this background just to give us a bit more focus on our subject. I'll add a bit more later on with our background, but just for right now I just want to add a little bit so again our eyes are kind of drawn more towards our subject and not the background. So that looks really good here. We'll just kind of touch this up right behind the cage for the moment. And now that that's looking the way I want it to, I want to add a little bit of lighting adjustment with the pants. We're adding this exposure adjustment layer, inverting the mask, and then just adding that shadow back in at the front because that light source is coming from the left side area. So naturally the front is just going to be a little bit darker. And then what we're doing here is I made a copy of our subject and I want to rasterize this layer because we're going to do a little bit of skin retouch. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of this hairband by using the spot healing brush. It's distracting and we don't really need that. Okay, so we're gonna make a couple of copies of this. One is gonna be for our color, the other is gonna be for the texture. So with the color layer here, we're gonna go up to Gaussian blur and let's see, we'll probably keep it about at this 4.5 pixels should do it. Let's just kind of see how this looks. Yeah, just enough blur so we kind of lose the texture. There's not a lot on her skin. She's got really good complexion, so not too heavy on that. And then for the texture, in order to separate this, we're going to go up to image and go to apply image, make sure that it's on color and subtract. And then we're going to put this into a linear light blend mode. What this does is separate the texture from the color. This isn't a tutorial on frequency separation, just kind of giving you an idea of how that process works. So what I'm doing now is on layers above the color is I'm sampling some of the skin tones, multiple different colors as well, not using just one. And we're just adding a little bit of shaping to her face, you know, increasing the highlights in some areas, maybe darkening some of the areas like right now right below the cheekbones there, just to give it a little bit of shaping and contour and exaggerating some of those nice features. And this just helps us to really make her face stand out and just pop just a little bit more. And we're gonna add a little bit on the eyes as well. But yeah, if you want an in-depth tutorial of frequency separation, there's a lot of great tutorials, especially by like Piximperfect and Phlearn, really good stuff. So this is just a very, very crash course walkthrough of what I'm doing here. So this is the before and after. And I am liking that. Yeah, so I think this looks really good and we can go ahead and move on from here. All right, so let's add another layer on top of this. We're basically going to take that same approach in the sense of sampling some different skin tones and using those tones to create highlights and shadows. I personally like to use this method as opposed to using exposure or levels and then inverting that, because I think what happens with that method is sometimes it desaturates those tones and naturally you're not going to have just black shadows. There's going to be a bit of a hue in there. So this gives me more of a customized look and the exact colors that I want to have for the highlights and shadows. So this is the method I usually like to default to. And what I'm going to do now is just take another few seconds to add these on a little bit, and then we'll move towards the hair, which is another bit of a tedious process, but I like it because it's kind of therapeutic. So we'll be there in just a second. Okay, so I like how the skin is looking, and we can go ahead and move on towards the hair now. So what I do with the hair is I essentially create 3 different layers or multiple layers, and each layer is going to be a different shade or lighting of the tones. So I like to have one for the shadows, midtones, and highlights. And then what we do is essentially just sample different colors of her hair. And then we're going to use a really, really small brush size and just kind of recreating those strands of hair one at a time. And that's why it is a very tedious process. So let's first go up to our brush, and we want to make sure we have the right one. I'm going to use the soft round pressure size brush, and we can increase the hardness a bit. And using that left bracket key, you can go ahead and just shrink the brush size down, but we're going to sample a dark tone first to work with the shadows. And I'm not going to go over my entire process because it is, it just takes a lot of time to do it. And I don't want to bore you to death, so I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a look to my approach into how I do this. as you can see, I'm just kind of starting out with the shadows right now and some of the darker tones, but I'm constantly sampling different colors. You want to have a lot of different colors of the hair and different tones so that it looks more natural. So what I'm going to do now is just continue to speed through this, and I'll be back with you in just a second once we move on to our next part of this composition. Alright, so I'm just gonna pause here because, like I said, it is a very tedious process and does take quite a lot of time, and I don't want to bore you to death to show the entire process, so we're gonna just leave it here for right now. You understand my procedure, so let's just go ahead and just skip right over this to kind of where I've left off at, and we can move on. Alright, so here is kind of what I left off with, and I might do some adjusting a little bit more down the road, but just for right now, this is what we're going to work with. As you can see, I basically extended the length of the hair. I wanted to have a longer hair. I wanted to have more strands, kind of look like it's flowing with the wind, and so this is where we're at. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next part. And the next section that we are moving on to are going to be the flowers. So what we want to create is just a nice bouquet of flowers inside this cage here. And I've already downloaded a ton of 3D assets from Envato Elements of these flowers. Now, you know, if you watch my tutorials, I love Envato Elements, and I love the fact that they have these 3 assets that you can use. No, you don't have to have this to complete this composition, but I will say it saves a ton of time in extracting them from the background, finding the right angles, so I always like to use this. But like I said, right now we're just finding a nice placement and a layout of these. It is quite a process. So what we're actually going to do here is speed through this section so you don't have to see this in real time. And we will be back with you in just a second. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I am back. So as you can see right now, we got a bit of a hot mess. So we have to clean this up, and masking is going to be our friend here. What we have to do is basically create a copy of the cage and the skirt, so that way what we can do now is just make selections of these 2 things, and it's going to help us out with our masking process. So the biggest thing that I'm doing right now is, or mainly paying attention to, is as we're adding these in, I want to make sure that I'm consistent in the parts that of the bars, you know, which bars are going to be in front, which bars are going to be behind and in the back. And so making sure that that's consistent and the areas of the flowers are staying in alignment with that. So quite a bit of time, but as you can see here, we're just skipping through this pretty quickly. I'm going to go ahead and take a few more seconds with this to wrap up this section, and then we will move on to the next part, which is going to be adding in the butterflies. So hang tight and we'll be moving on shortly. Alright, so here we are. I think it looks really good. I know one of my goals was I wanted to basically not lose the cage in this sea of flowers, and I think we did great with that. Alright, so the next thing that we have to do now is add in the butterflies, and I'm just going to take the same approach like I did with the flowers, just kind of finding a nice spot for them in our canvas here. I'm not going to show you that because, well, there's nothing to it. So let's just go ahead and skip over to that to see where I place them. And as you can see here, I added quite a few. I want to have quite a variety of butterflies, either flying or actually landing on the flowers or our subjects in this case. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, what I want to move on to now is adding the shadows to our flowers. We're going to have shadows casted by the flowers themselves, and from the bars. So I want to make sure that we add that realistic touch to it. And as you can see here, what I'm doing is just add an exposure adjustment layer, decreasing the lighting, and then we're inverting the mask, painting that back on the flowers, and then do that over and over and over again until we are done with all of our mini garden that we've got going on here. So let's just take a moment with this, and then we can move on to the next section. So here we are with a pretty close-up view of those shadows added on, and as you can see, it definitely adds that nice realistic touch that we're looking for. Proper lighting is vital for a successful composition. And we're going to move on now towards the skirt here, and we're doing the same thing with the lighting, but this time we're adding a solid color adjustment layers and using this method to tackle this. So I've added on this one, we've clipped it below, we're going to invert the mask, and then we're just going to paint this light on the left side here. Remember that our light source is coming from the left, so we just want to brighten up some of these tones of the skirt here, just on the left side here. Okay, so what we can do now is add another solid color adjustment layer. We'll add this one just below the one we were working with, so that way we can keep the highlight on top. And we'll use this tone here, and I've inverted the mask. Same thing, we're just gonna brighten some of this area up here. And even on some of these creases, we can just accentuate those just a bit more and make those, or just give it more of that high contrast. Like I said, I like the high contrast look, so that's what we're doing here. And then for this layer in particular, let's go ahead and play with the blend modes. We can put this into overlay blend mode, I think looks good, and we'll lower the opacity on this a bit. And then we can even go up to our highlight layer, and then same thing, we can maybe put this into blend mode as well. Let's see, one of these should look pretty good here. Pen light. We'll stick with that one, lower the opacity so that way it's not too harsh. And then we will add yet another solid color adjustment layer on top of this one. And then this will kind of be another highlight just added on top of that. We won't put this into a blend mode, but we'll just kind of paint on top of this and maybe exaggerate some of those areas just right on the edge here. So I just want to increase the light intensity just a bit on the back side here. Perfect. Okay, well, lower the opacity, and then we're going to add a bit of a Gaussian blur. I think the edges are too neat and too clean, so I just want to just kind of feather it up a little bit, so maybe about like the 0.6 pixels. I think we'll do that. And then we'll introduce some light on the right side too. So just like the flowers, adding in all those shadows, we need to touch up our butterflies. And not only do you add shadows, but I think a lot of them just need to be a bit more bright. So we're going to take this one at a time, increasing the exposure on a lot of these, and also kind of using the exposure adjustment layer to add shadows that are needed. And that way we can just brighten up them and make it look, again, more realistic in that they fit in this environment. It's a nice sunny day outside, so they need to be lit up pretty well. And I'm not going to take you through every single butterfly here for the sake of time, but just kind of show you some of these. This one in particular, we'll just make sure that it's nice and dark because it is inside the cage towards the top here. But here we are with that final result, and I think it looks really nice. They look nice and bright, beautiful scene, makes you want to just jump in that picture, sing a song, just like you're in a Disney movie. But we are basically at the end here. Very last minute touches, and then we'll call it a day. I'm making a copy of this background layer, and we're going to convert this into a smart object, so that way I can add another blur on top of this. I mentioned that I was probably going to do that earlier on, so that's what we're doing now. Let's go to blur, Gaussian blur, and let's increase this just because I want our focus to be on our subject. I want the eyes to be drawn towards our lady here, and just even on the edges here, I can erase some of that and maybe bring some of that into focus a bit. It's just mainly what's right behind her, because I want the eyes, again, just to be drawn towards our subject. And one of the last things I want to add in before we go to the camera raw filter is I'm just picking a nice bright tone, and we're going to add a bit more light to our background here. Just brighten it up a little bit, not too heavy, just a couple of little dabs here and there, just to, again, just brighten some of this up. And I can even lower the opacity. We just want it to be pretty subtle here. Okay, so that should basically do it, and let's go ahead and now get ready for the camera raw filter. I also went ahead and quickly adjusted the color of the hair, which you did not see, but there it is. So we're going to merge all of these at the top, and let's head into the camera raw filter where we're going to do our final adjustments and call it a day. So here we are, and let's start out with adding just a little bit of contrast here. So let's increase that. And a lot of times I like to just zoom out just a little bit. So let's do that first. I want to come down to the shadows, lower those, or just make those a little bit more pronounced. And clarity we can increase a bit. We can bump up the saturation just a hair. I kind of like the look of what I have right now, so I'm not doing too much. I'll increase the sharpening and just mask some of this out. So let's increase that a bit more, and now we can come down to the masking here. Alright, so that looks really nice. Let's move on to the color mixer. I'll pull the greens towards the yellows just a little bit. And let's go back to the saturation. Maybe I'll bump up the aquas and the blues. I know I took them down early on, but I think I want to boost them back up a bit. And let's come to the color grading. Again, I'm not going to do too much because I kind of like the look of this. I'm just right now more experimenting with some of these tones just to see if something, you know, maybe changes my mind, but I'll just kind of leave it somewhere right around here. Well, let's increase that up. Yeah, so that's fine. We'll come down to the effects. We'll add a bit of grain. So let's increase the grain here. I'm not going to add a vignette for this because it's outside. And the temperature, I'll just kind of warm this up a little bit. All right, so at this moment, you're probably like, dude, Jason, this is not what we just did in the camera raw filter. So I actually spent a little bit more time on this image. I wasn't quite pleased with some of the hair and some of the color corrections, and I just took a little bit more time playing around with it, and it was a bit finicky. But in the end, this is the final result. Really didn't do too much, like I said, just played around more with the hair and just a little bit of color work. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this, not so much tutorial, but just kind of more of a composition breakdown. If you like it, let me know in the comments section, and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And if you're not doing so already, I really appreciate the support in helping out this channel grow. So if you could subscribe, again, if you're not doing so, I would love that. In the meantime, folks, please be safe. I hope to have you back for our next video here at Blended Graphics. Take care. I'll see you very soon.